Hi, I'm Jess.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and you're listening to Your Therapist is Not Okay.
On this episode, we're going to be discussing why therapists always seem to blame clients' parents for their problems.
Hmm.
Stay tuned.
First, we kind of wanted to start with thinking about what we hear from clients or other folks around therapy about blaming parents for their problems.
This came up not as a listener question necessarily, but just as something when Ryan and I were talking about. We constantly have to navigate in the therapy room. A client will come in and it's not uncommon for them to say, like, I was talking to my mom about going to therapy, and she was like, "Oh, you're just gonna blame everything on me." Or like, or any caregiver's like, "Oh, so it's all my fault. That's why you need to go talk to your therapist." This happens so often in a first session for us.
Hmm. So, as we'll talk about a lot in this episode, like there are plenty of moments, which is why this came up in this podcast, where we're like, oh, okay, that's probably connected with the parenthood. So it's a very kind of maybe fair question to explore. We also hear a lot, especially as trauma therapists, of this kind of idea of like, oh, you know what, my parents were great or my parents were perfect,
Mm.
as like one of the first things people share with us, kind of signaling to us like, don't talk about that. It's not a problem.
Well, yeah, like it's like I'm here to talk about this. I get that there's a trope that it's always the parents' fault. My parents were great. Let's move on.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And that's often kind of packaged with the idea of like, oh, you know, I had a great childhood. It's nothing to talk about my childhood.
Hmm. Here's the interesting thing. When someone says that to me, Ryan, I
Hmm.
almost always think, okay, there's something here. And I usually think like it's going to take a bit of time before we might want to dive into parents. So I usually just like note it. It's not like we had this session on like lying and if we are we thinking you're lying? No, the answer is no. I do not think my clients are lying when they say this. I do think that like there's something here that we haven't touched on. So it's almost like an indicator for me to wait. Wait until it feels safe enough to bring up complexities because I've never had really a client that hasn't had something they want to deal with from their childhood.
Yeah, there's always going to be more to it, right? Like, and I do think that everyone struggles with things. So that's totally normal. I similarly kind of feel like it's often kind of a flag that like, no, maybe you didn't have a great childhood, and I don't. I sometimes think usually just in my head, occasionally out loud, who are you trying to convince? That does come out of me sometimes in client work when someone's like really, really reiterating a point and I'm not fighting with them about it. Like I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, okay, I do you believe you yet?
You're trying to
It's
convince someone.
right, right.
Mm.
And that can be like kind of a big kind of defense to protect that scary topic or a topic that maybe it feels like I don't want to shame or hurt my parents.
Yeah.
But none of this is to say that we disagree about you having a great childhood. Maybe you did have a great childhood. It just means that there's probably also things that were hard.
I think for when someone says it to me, I usually think that's amazing. I'm really glad you got to have that. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not going to take it away from you. It feels like sometimes maybe seeing us, there's a threat that we're going to tarnish good things or good
Mhm.
memories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can really come, especially if someone is at the time they come to see us
Mm.
in a really happy place with their family and they have a really good relationship and maybe they don't want to lose that.
Yeah. When we fall into our family system really well, there's a lot of harmony there. And the family system is just what role do you play in your family? Um, are you someone that's often the one giving advice or that people come to? Are you the one that's kind of causing humor? Are you the savior and the good one? There's so many different dynamics that families have. And often when it's all playing their parts well, as you've learned over the years with certain patterns, there's going to be harmony there. You might be coming already with a harmonious relationship. So I think that for me to answer this question, for anyone wondering, especially if they're getting their backs up being like, see, it is always about the parent. No, it's not. It's actually not. And I don't think it is. But here's what I do think. No matter what we do in life, no matter what we are kind of in relational status with or how we're coping, we've had to learn our behaviors from somewhere. We have a primary foundational relationship somewhere. And almost inevitably, you didn't grow up alone. Like, unless you're a sweet little street urchin in London, you have had to rely on people. Like, you're not just pickpocketing the streets like a little gung ho kid. Like, I think you've had someone you had to worry about.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's definitely that just truth about all the time. I don't know why it's a London street urchin that is like your go-to
Okay,
example,
I always think about this like that. Please, sir, can I have some more? I always think that whenever I think about like, have you grown up alone? I always think of that reference.
but well, in a way, it's actually a great example, right? Because Oliver did have significant people
Mhm,
in his world that would have formed good and bad parts of attachment with them. And that's like a lot of kind of what we're talking about here is like these primary relationships are how we learn to interact with the world, how the world's going to treat us, what kind of attachments we form, etc. And so even if those things are overall really wonderful,
mhm,
it still can help us to learn more about where did that come from. And it can even be in like a fun way that you might already talk about in your family about like, oh, I get this from my mom and I get this from my dad.
mhm,
You know, maybe dad's a little more anxious and you share that, and maybe mom likes to like know always know what's happening. And those could even go together really well. Like
mhm.
being organized helps me feel less anxious.
Yep.
So it's not to say that the things that you inherit are bad,
Oh my God,
but
no.
we all have an inheritance.
And I think that when you said about attachment actually works really well because we hear it all the time. I feel like attachment theory is one of those catch-all terms now that like everyone kind of knows about. Like being anxiously attached, avoidantly attached, either disorganized or preoccupied is how we would say it, where it's a little bit both end. And then securely attached. Like how we form our earliest relationships usually then indicate how we're going to form relationships with others. And the interesting thing about that is actually your attachment style can change depending on who you're in relationship with. For example, I might have a pretty securely attached relationship when I'm at work with my like work colleagues, and I might be anxiously attached with partners. I
Hmm.
might have a difficult relationship. Maybe I'm a bit more avoidant with friends. Like you can actually morph and change based on where your social location is. And that often is also linked with your earliest memories. And so it's not monolithic. It's actually like figuring out what happened in our past allows us then to kind of think about like, where am I relating now?
Hmm. Hmm. And we had talked about in a previous episode too how we just really like reminding folks that attachment theory comes from psychodynamic and psychoanalytic practitioners like Ainsley and Bowlby. Um, and so it's always fun for me when someone says like, "Oh, I don't really do psychodynamic. I like to think more about attachment." Okay, yeah, sure. Um, and it's just such an important part of understanding yourself, understanding how you are in relationships,
Yeah.
and kind of why some things come up. It can also be one thing that informs our defenses.
Hmm.
And so if you kind of notice or through therapy come to notice a way you react to a certain type of situation. Like maybe I shut down, or maybe I
Mm.
get really loud and angry, maybe I make a joke. These different types of defenses might really make sense in the context that you grew up in. And they were likely, in fact, very effective at getting your needs met, at being seen or not being seen, getting to be the center of attention and, having some positive reinforcement. Humans, including tiny humans, are very good at getting their needs met. But there then in the future can come situations in which our old defense that gets needs met might become what we call maladaptive, where we're now maybe making jokes in inappropriate contexts
Yeah.
and it's pushing people away.
I think exactly that. I love that you talked about that aspect of being good at getting our needs met because it brings up resilience. Let's take preoccupied attachment, for example. That one's a really good example of childhood because often we wouldn't know when love's coming. If I'm painting a picture and something is kind of just coming out and like my parent walks in the door and they praise me and they think how good I am, I now have a reinforcement that I want to do it again. But I may not know that my parent just got belittled at work. I can't know that. And so when they come home the next day, guess what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to want to paint some more. I want that affirmation. I think this is like I'm on a roll. And then my parent comes in and says, "Oh my gosh, like what's this mess?" I've now learned that this isn't just a safe activity. And children are really good at blaming themselves as well. We don't always have the capacity to know how to conceptualize what's going on in someone else's external world, right? We just know that we did something that had praise and then something now that has gotten us vitriol. And therefore, we can go through the world with this really clear example that love can be given and taken away, and we don't know when. And anger is a really good way of thinking about that in our past. Does that mean that your caregiver is bad? No. As an adult, we realize they had a really bad day at work. They're constantly being demeaned. They're at their tether. But a child doesn't know that. They can't know that. And
Hmm.
so being able to recognize these defenses and link it into the past isn't necessarily about blaming. It's about realizing and having the capacity now to see the nuances of what might have driven our preoccupied attachment now when it comes to getting love.
Absolutely. And then there are also examples that we might work on in therapy where maybe you did have some really traumatic experiences in childhood, or maybe things were not set up in a way that was like safe and secure in the home. People need to have some sense of a safe attachment. So one theory is about bad objects. And we call them internalized bad objects sometimes because we have this need to feel safe with someone. So even if that person maybe isn't safe for whatever reason, chaos in their lives or aggression towards you, whatever it might be, a lot of children will find a way to protect that relationship by taking the badness into themselves, is what they say. By them thinking like, oh, I messed up. Kind of like Jess was saying in that painting example of
Yeah.
like, oh, this must be my fault because my parent has to be good. People do feel a sense of safety and security when they know that someone is good, or even, it might not be quote good always, it might be strong, tough,
Mm.
powerful, something or someone that you can really rely on, because that's the kind of gateway through which you navigate the entire world.
This might be why you need your parents to be good in the beginning of session.
Hmm.
That thinking that they have done something wrong might actually undermine some memories for you. It might make you feel like some of the ways that you've related to the world have to radically shift. We keep people safe in order to feel safe often as children. We want our caregivers to be those who can support us, can nurture us, can be there as basically our life force. We need them. We rely on them.
Yep, absolutely. And then that kind of links back with the ways that we found to keep our parents, quote, good. And a lot of that ends up being the way we navigate relationships and trauma in the future about like maybe making sure that our partner has their needs met. And that's
Yeah.
the way that we make sure that we're taken care of. Or maybe making sure that we kind of make ourselves a little small because
Mm.
the kind of thing was it's best if children are seen and not heard.
Yep.
All kinds of different examples of the way we navigate earning love, so to speak. And most people have an answer, conscious or unconscious, if you ask them, how do you earn love?
Mm.
Because there are hoops that we are expected to jump through as kids.
Oh, yeah. And we can throw ourselves under the bus. As therapists, it's not uncommon for one of the ways for us to get love by nurturing others, by almost being necessary, that you come to me when there's a problem. I'm the one you rely on. That could be one of our object wounds. So it's
Mhm.
it's really not like this is just a client-centered problem. This is an everyone thing. Not one person hasn't learned how to survive.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. Yes. And we'll take it on as, part of our jobs as therapists too, to navigate it in a way that feels good to you. If you're
Mm.
a client for whom you have a really important and close relationship with your family or your parents, we can explore these things without saying, we're not going to say like, and so in conclusion, your dad's an asshole. That's not where we're going with this, right? We might say like, "Oh, okay, it seems like that might be where you kind of learn this behavior from."
Yeah.
We don't need to shame or attack your parents to support you. And that actually kind of links in really well to another thing that we want to think about, which is black and white thinking. Um, and that's kind of pretty normal developmental thing that every person goes through. At the beginning of our lives, it's a lot easier to think of things as all good or all bad. Our brains are still developing. We don't have a lot of things to compare them to. And so that kind of creates a situation in which we feel like parents have to be good and I have to be bad. That's where that bad object wound shows up, is
Mm.
we can't yet tolerate or comprehend the gray area, which is often referred to as the quote depressive position, um, which is kind of funny because it's where you want to be.
Oftentimes in psychodynamic theory, especially any of the schools based in the UK. So when Ryan said bad object wound, black and white thinking is called the paranoid schizoid position. The gray thinking is depressive. There's a lot of weird terms in our field, but they often have really important implications. So you might notice Ryan and I trying to avoid them, except for this episode. This episode, we're diving in.
We're diving in a little bit. Yeah. So the paranoid schizoid position is this like back and forth.
Yeah.
Everyone's all good or all bad. And this, you might see someone who is in this quote position or in
Mm.
certain situations maybe is in this position when they kind of want to wash their hands of you because something didn't go well.
Mm.
Or they really want just to be with you. They really want to have that good. And the depressive position is where I'm more able to say that, like, my dad taught me how to cook, and I love that I'm such a good cook. Also, it
Mm.
was really scary that he would yell at me when I would make a mistake.
Yep.
And those are both true. Dad's still a good guy and a great cook, and was scary sometimes.
And my mom would always celebrate my wins. And this is why I'm so successful now. But losing wasn't an option, or failure wasn't an option. And so being able to actually start to talk about our past and our childhood, sometimes even having healthy anger and being able to recognize that doesn't take away anything, that everything can exist together, moves away from this idea of perfection into what I would think of being more realistic so that we can actually work on it and become healthier as we're working through these patterns together.
And that was really the idea behind the depressive position, is that it's about dealing with the difficult and sometimes stark realities of the world,
Mm.
the grayness. We want to kind of turn now towards how do we work with this stuff in therapy? What might our goals be, knowing that childhoods aren't perfect and that parents are just people doing their best?
I think that a lot of times when somebody comes into my office, so I can speak for myself, it's about wanting to get to the root of something that has been plaguing them for a while. That can be identity, it can be relational patterns, it can be our affect when we're in groups or big situations like work. I keep doing the same thing over and over, and I don't know how to stop it, is a very common way of coming into therapy. Or this is a relational pattern I always have, and I'm nervous. This is why we look to the past, because it's very uncommon for this to just come from nowhere. And so it might not be the past in the sense of just early childhood. It might be something that happened in teenage years. There could have been a trauma, but we're looking at basically what did this teach us about how to behave now? So Ryan and I have been talking a lot about theory and psychodynamic, but here's just basically the normalized way that we talk about psychodynamic. It's not about blaming the past. It's actually about being able to link it so that we have more control to realize what's happening now. We have this great phrase, I'm sure you've heard before for on this podcast from us, that the past is dynamically alive now. In fact, I think I said it at the beginning of this episode. And so what we're trying to do is actually just link the why to our behavior, which is often what you're coming into therapy to do anyway. And it usually comes from the very beginning of how we learned how to establish ourselves, get love, how we might blame ourselves to keep love and keep it safe. And so for us, it's getting to the root of it. And then we get to make an active choice. Rather than falling into this habit, we can now see where it's coming from, maybe where the trigger is, and then have control enough to change that.
Mm.
And it means that it actually has less power over us. That's why we're doing what we're doing in psychodynamic, not to blame, but actually to kind of grapple with, understand, and then break free of it. It's the root of what's going on.
But for me, it seems it's a practice of really making space around the thing, right? So that someone has this sense of like, instead of just behaving kind of out of habit, out of what their usual character is, they have this kind of mental and sometimes physical space to kind of pause and look around and think, hold on, I'm about to do the thing that I've
Yep.
talked about in therapy. Why am I about to do the thing? Should I do the thing? And maybe yes. Maybe, yeah, that is the right way to take care of myself right now. And then there might be other times where you think, hold on a second,
Yeah.
I don't have to do that anymore.
You know, I was thinking as you were talking about that trope we often hear that we marry our father, or we marry our mother, or we marry like our
Mm,
caregiver, whoever. It's because of that reestablishing pattern of what we understand love to be.
yeah.
And so it's also that aspect of like, what are we trying to replay now? I don't think we've talked about that yet, but often when something bad has happened to us, we often will get back into a very similar situation. Our body psychically is trying to replay it to figure out how to fix it, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so some of the whys around maladaptive behaviors are not just that we're linked into this exact response, but often we might actually orchestrate particular similar relationships in order to feel more comfortable. We know how to navigate them and also to try to almost fix it in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, doing things that are really new or really different is scary. We don't know
Yeah.
what the outcome is going to be as much.
Mhm.
And so sometimes a familiar situation, a familiar dynamic feels a lot more safe and comfortable. And that's a great place where therapy can come in to be a reassuring and supportive and honest space so that you can make the decision that you want that might be challenging,
Mm,
that might be the uncomfortable decision.
yeah. And that is why almost I'm batting 100% over here. Every time we have a breakthrough in therapy, the next 100% of the time comes, so what do we do about it?
Mm,
Because there's a fear of change.
yeah.
That's how I've made sense of it. Like as soon as we understand the past and we understand what's going on, we have that breakthrough of realization. There can be a real terror. Not only that I'm going to stay there, which I understand that fear, but
Mhm.
also like I need help now. I don't want, like, I'm nervous about this breakthrough. I'm nervous about this success. I'm nervous about this change, which makes sense. If we've only had the same patterns, it might not be great, but we know exactly what our role is. We know exactly how to move around in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that can even sometimes that ends up presenting, this is more for the therapist listening, as what we might call resistance, right?
Mm,
As like some clients might not be ready to make that change.
mhm,
So that interpretation or that progress might not happen. But we're still building understanding, we're building safety. Like there's lots of things to do until the client is ready for that kind of shift and able to make it on their own and maybe in a way that we don't see coming, right?
mm,
Because ultimately it's about them, not us. Um, yeah, I think doing this kind of work in therapy is amazing. This is one of my favorite kind of things to work on. Just opening up space and like letting clients really be authentic in ways that
mhm.
they maybe were not able to in the past.
Yeah. I think it's hard work being able to look at your past in a way that the defenses can kind of feel like they get to let go. So, what we're talking about when it comes to past and looking into the present is all the ways of kind of recognizing and then making a choice to let go.
Mm.
That is so difficult because a lot of times we base ourself and our understanding of worth and how we get love on some of the very things that we might be challenging now. And so there's a lot of processing that happens along the way of thinking, who, not just what do I do about it, but who would I be
Mm.
if I wasn't this?
Yeah, which is very scary. I mean, that's a big kind of existential question.
Yeah.
That's not, it takes time to be ready for that. And people don't want to do that every day, right? That would be exhausting. So there can also be, I notice that there's kind of like gaps between realizations and therapy too, because people need time to reassemble things and to kind of come to terms with and process what they've realized. It is exhausting work.
You often say, Ryan, in our podcast, and I've heard you say other words, that like therapy sometimes is incredible, but oftentimes it's painful, it's difficult, it's challenging. You're not always going to walk away feeling great. And what we're talking about today with linking this to the past is sometimes these are the sessions that are going to feel incredibly exciting because we got an idea of a breakthrough and really scary because we have to come to terms with something we might not have before.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always tell clients like not every session is going to end with happy feelings. Not,
Yeah.
you're not going to feel better every time we meet. But that really allows the complexity into the reality of relationships, which are never perfect, whether it's your parent, a partner, a friend, now. Um, no relationship is perfect. And navigating these is just one of the fundamental challenges of being a human being.
Yeah.
Um, I do think therapy can really offer, for some people, a first kind of training ground, so to speak, to practice rupture and repair, to practice being disappointed by your therapist or having your therapist let you down. Sometimes it's as little as a therapist taking a vacation, planned well in advance. They let you know 2 months ago, I'm going to be gone on March, whatever. And then when they go, you maybe feel, you have some feelings. You feel abandoned, you feel upset, you feel angry, and you bring that to your therapist and you're able to talk it through and have a reparative experience instead of just feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
And that can be a first place to kind of practice with the guardrails on, so to speak, because it's our job to be holding and supportive through that experience. Whereas friends and family, that's not their job. They're just existing. But you can practice that with us and then try it out in other parts of your life.
That can be a breakthrough in itself to
Mm,
be able to bring anger to your therapist
yes.
and have them hold you in it and work on it with you.
Mm,
A good therapist might still have feelings about it. None of us want to do bad. We usually aren't trying to hurt you, but if you bring something that we did hurt and we're able to work on it with you, that might be the very first time you've ever brought anger without having somebody maybe be more angry or shut down and play the victim so that you feel like you're an aggressor. Like there's so many ways in which anger can feel like a really scary topic. And what you're saying, Ryan, is like to say, I felt abandoned. You can objectively be like, okay, I'm allowed to have vacation, but instead be able to be like, let's talk about this abandonment. What did I do? How did I hurt you? What was it like for me to take 2 weeks rather than one? Do you
mhm.
wonder who I went with? Like all of those things you can kind of like really work on with somebody in a way that feels then life changing.
And that can be like that role of a therapist is unique in that we don't need to be so defensive,
Mm.
right? We can let go of all our defenses that we might use in our relationships outside of therapy and just be able to have let you down, have misunderstood you, have said the wrong thing, and just kind of own and process through that.
Mm. It is a space where you get to play with different parts. So as much as we're wondering what are we going to do about it, actually, as soon as you ask that question, you're already doing it, is usually my response. As soon as you've had this breakthrough and wandering into it, something's already shifting. It's very hard for us to be cognizant of something so deep and it not to have rippled up to the surface in some ways.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an adage that I love that once the interpretation is made, it's already done. The
Yeah.
change has happened.
Yeah. We're talking a lot about parents. And so one of the things that I think would be kind of interesting is maybe to talk about this aspect of the cycle, right? A lot of clients that might want to be parents get really scared about passing on some of their trauma to their children or repeating that cycle. And so I think this is a really apt place for us to give some insight into what we see in that and also some tips in order to help break this cycle.
Yeah, this is something I hear pretty often, especially from clients with complex trauma who maybe through our work together have kind of realized a lot of things about their trauma, or maybe they've done a lot of work elsewhere in the past, but now they know I'm pregnant or I would like to be pregnant. Um, so they might come and say, how do I not pass this all on?
Hmm.
And there's kind of a lot to work through with that, especially if someone had a lot of acute trauma, unsafe attachment experiences. They've missed out on kind of learning how to be a parent, so to speak.
Hmm.
Parents who do a good enough job, which we'll kind of come back to that idea in a little bit, um, they are also teaching you how to be a parent. This is how you respond when someone is angry at you. When a toddler is having a tantrum or yelling at you, this is how you respond in a way that is caring and maybe also firm. This is the way you hold boundaries.
Hmm.
This is the way you help someone else get their needs met.
Hmm.
This is the way you take care of yourself when other people are freaking out too. So if you didn't get some of those how to be a parent things, it can be really hard to feel like I'm in the deep end. The only ways that I know of making a child stop having a tantrum, I'm aware are dangerous and cruel. So that can be a lot of processing through with a client. Sometimes processing the event again, even if they've processed it before, what that was like for them.
Hmm.
And then what I would often ask clients then is, what do you wish would have happened instead?
Hmm.
So that you maybe have an idea of what might your kid want? What would the perfect thing have been? If your parent had said the perfect thing or done the perfect thing, what would that have been?
Hmm.
It's also a place where clients might often do some reading outside of session that they feel that they want to. I'm not a homework therapist, but I also have lots of clients that might come and say, like, I've been reading this thing. Or
Hmm.
I've been talking to my friends that are parents, and they've said this is how they do that. And then we can talk about if they want to do it that way. Try it
Hmm.
on. Um, it's a lot of work for clients, in my experience. If you've had complex trauma and now you're wanting to be a parent, it's a lot of work because you're learning these things for the first time that other people have had more exposure to. I don't know about others. Some people have.
One thing that can come up that we don't often talk about is that we can actually be triggered back to our past trauma by our child.
Hmm.
When we're swaddling our child and they're crying and we're nursing them and holding them back together, we might actually feel like they get to have something special that I never got. When they fall down and scrape their knee instead of their parent maybe yelling at them or having a bigger reaction than them, that they can just provide comfort. There's going to be realizations along your parenting that you might be giving your child something that actually you're allowed to feel jealous that you didn't get to have. And I think those are also the things that working through in therapy is really important. That as we're seeing our child grow, we might be welcomed back into a world where we realize what we either did or didn't have as a child. And I think that's a really important thing for us to work through.
Absolutely. And it can be another example. We've talked before about iterative learning or kind of cycles where we've talked about this before, but now we're going to come back to it. This can be a big time where we come back to it. Like maybe we processed a long time ago that this happened when you were two, but now you have a 2-year-old and you're
Hmm.
kind of re-experiencing it from the other side. And so you get to process that and have even a more complete understanding of yourself and the active choices you want to make in those situations.
Oh, for
I
sure.
do really think, just to kind of reassure people too, that like with all that positive intention and putting care and effort towards understanding and caring for yourself, you're going to be a good enough parent.
There is a real fear, I think, for any new parent or someone who is parenting that have come to my office that there's a lot of shame attached, wanting to be the perfect parent. Just like your parents were not perfect, so too will you not be. There's no such thing as perfection. And the shame that can be attached to that can actually be more silencing than helpful.
Hmm.
May not want to bring up something we're struggling with our friends, our family, our therapist, because there's shame that we're not good enough. And so, actually, I would love you to say more about that idea of a good enough parent, because I think that that is kind of our ticket out of here. That even with every best intention, you are safe to fail, and your failures are not going to be the very traumas of your child. You're allowed to make mistakes. Good enough allows for that. So I thought maybe say more, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. With this kind of idea of good enough, which also comes from object relations and psychodynamic therapy, is basically just the understanding that we don't have to be perfect. If kind of across a childhood, things are overall supportive and overall let the child to develop in a positive and healthy way, then that's good enough. It doesn't mean that there weren't struggles, that there weren't, mistakes and failures, or that you were never scary as a parent, or that you never said something mean. The perfection is going to drive you insane. You're not going to be
Yeah.
able to be perfect. No one will succeed at that. But if you're good enough, it will be okay.
Hmm.
And, you know, maybe your kiddo will have therapy in the future. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you were a bad parent. You were still good enough. It
Yeah.
just means that no one can be perfect, and we all have kind of growth and learning we can do in relationships. So I think if you put that focus on being good enough, it can take some of the weight after out of that focus of being perfect.
Yep. And being able to afterwards say, I was way grumpier than I needed to about that painting. There's no mess here. You were just having fun. I'm sorry that my bad day took it out on you. You're also then building up this resilience, not of parentification with your child where they have to take care of you, but allowing them to understand, maybe break out of that bad, like I'm bad mode. You can do things like that along the way that allow that rupture and allow that repair immediately in the moment. And being able to not be ashamed of these actions, but be like, that wasn't my finest. It's just what we do all the time. It's how we live life. There's no such thing as being fixed. The healthiest among us recognize when patterns are coming back and be like, that was a pattern that I have been working on for years to get rid of. Surprised it came back up now, but I'm betting it's because I have my bandwidth's kind of like snapped and I need to just take a moment and say sorry. We can do those things.
That does really, reminds me that a lot of the challenges that parents face are around communication and social
Mhm.
expectations of communication with children. In a lot of kind of cultural context, people aren't really expected to explain themselves to children, right? Like, because I said so, so, not an uncommon adage. I have heard because I said so plenty of times in my life. And that can just be confusing for kids. They don't really learn from that. So part of that good enough, I love that you said that, Jess, is like it's not that I never made a mistake or that I'm not going to keep making mistakes, but it's that I'm willing to take some accountability with my kid. And a lot of people, I think, fear making mistakes so much that they don't want to kind of own up to them. If you are able to own up to a mistake or even just a tense situation to your kid, they will learn from that and
Yeah.
grow into the type of the person who can take accountability or
Yeah.
who can not assume the worst and might be able to say like, you know what, maybe they had a bad day.
Yeah.
Because I know sometimes my parent would blow up when I had a bad day and they would talk to me about it later and we would be okay.
Yeah.
So good enough also gives you that sense of like, we're gonna be okay.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I want to say one final thing before we end. I think it's
Mm.
really important, especially in a day and age where the internalized misogyny still means that we have to have kids.
Yeah,
It's a really valid decision if you've decided not to. If you've decided that maybe you've been a parent enough in your life to your own parents and to everyone else that you don't want to, or you feel like in some ways it's just not something that feels necessary for you. We're talking a lot about parents and them being parents, but I think I'd be remiss to make that um, a standard baseline. I really want to celebrate you if you've decided, you know what? I either don't think I want this, I don't think I'd be good at it because of my past. I want to be able to live a life free of having to repeat these cycles or just live for myself now. Those should also be so celebrated. You've made a big choice. Both of these are choices. Going to therapy because we want kids also is an incredible choice to say, I'd like to go to therapy because I don't, and I want to be able to really honor myself in that. There are a thousand complexities between either of those options, and I don't want to make a black and white, but I do want you to know that if you're listening to this and thinking that's not something we honor, actually, it's usually something that we can celebrate just as much as being a good enough parent.
absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I think there's a disproportionate pressure, I was saying when we were planning this episode on women are kind of expected to want to have kids.
Mhm.
Men, not necessarily as much. So I really, yeah, I really want our listeners to hear that. Absolutely. You don't have to have kids.
And you're awesome if you don't.
And there's
Yeah.
probably still a lot to talk about your parents in therapy. So
Oh, yeah. Like, still come to us. Just know that we celebrate you and as much as we do anyone else. Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. This got deep and important and very theory heavy, which I love, but hopefully you do too. If you have any questions, just send us a DM. We can answer any of those you have. I know we used a lot of terms that you might actually want to explore more. Message us. And if you have any questions, always shoot them over to us. We have like a bunch of episodes brewing, and the more questions we get, the merrier. So thank you everyone for sending them in to us. And stay tuned for next week.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.